Just in case anybody is wondering why nothing is happening, it's just because OC is still admitting people. There seems to be plenty of audience, which is, of course, excellent. We will get going soon, I'm sure.
Yes, and I'll also transfer to some to access so that we can just start now. All right, so okay, so um thank you so much, um everyone, for making out time to be here. And I want to, in a very special way, thank Dr. Aubrey de Grey for being here. He is, you cannot talk about, I call him the godfather of modern longevity science, because not because he is the one that propounded the concept, but because he is one of the most extremely supportive fellow in the field. He is very responsive when you call on him, and you cannot, I think, from where I'm sitting, he must have contributed to, let's say, 90% of the longevity initiative in recent time. And he is the founder of so many um, longevity initiatives, but currently he is the founder and chief science officer of Longevity Escape Velocity. So it's important to mention that he pioneered is our initiative, but he sponsored the launch of Afrolongevity. Most people don't know about that. So he sponsored the launch of Afrolongevity in South Africa. He also was the main sponsor of the first longevity summit in the continent. So, and that event attracted a lot of industrial experts and leaders. And that is when people started making sense of what we're doing with Afro-longevity. So I'm going to yield the mic to Dr. De Grey for him to give us a little bit about his background, and then we get into the lecture proper. Thank you so much, Doc.
Well, thank you so much, OC. It's always a delight to speak at your events. And I really mean that. I want to say somebody is not muted. Um, uh, yeah, I just want to say, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. I was trained as a scientist, and I have spent, you know, a long, long time working on designing and overseeing the scientific work that needs to be done to, to bring aging under comprehensive medical control. But ever since, well, certainly the early 2000s, I have also recognized that it's vital to grow a community of colleagues who are pushing this crusade forward alongside me. And I have, I think, been pretty successful in that. But the fact is, the definition of growing a community is that other people come along who have the commitment and also the talent to do stuff that needs to be done. And I want to say that Ursi and Brenda, who created and who lead Afrolongevity, are absolutely up there among the most important people by that criterion. These are extraordinarily talented and extraordinarily dedicated people who have navigated very substantial challenges in bringing Afro-longevity through the past few years and growing it into a community that we see today. And of course, they will be growing it further as we move forward. So it's been a privilege to me. It's been a privilege to me to do what I can to help in a small way, whether financially or in terms of turning up at meetings and conferences, to help them, to help the movement, and to help you. I really want to spend some time, and I'll only briefly say this now, but I think I'll come back to it later on the role that Africa needs to play in all of this. Because certainly in the West, the people who are technically minded, whether in medicine or in any other field, tend, I'm afraid, still, to view Africa as more of a natural resource and less of an intellectual resource. And, that needs to change. I'm quite sure that most people here today are well aware that that is a gross distortion, that there's plenty of smart people in Africa, and that it's about time that the world worked together in this kind of way. I definitely believe that Africa needs to be, a full-fledged partner alongside the rest of the world to take its seat at the table in the longevity crusade. And a huge part of why I feel that is that not only do you have a lot to offer, but also you have a lot to benefit in Africa. It is widely overlooked that aging is already the number one medical problem. Excuse me. Is already the number one medical problem in every single country in the world. We can say that very firmly simply because we can look at statistics. We can look at how long people live. If you ask what is the average lifespan in any country, then of course you are aggregating the amount of deaths that happen early in life from infectious diseases and the amount of deaths that happen through the health problems of late life, the stuff that we're talking about today. And you know what? The average lifespan of every single country in the world is more than 50. And it's been more than 50 for 10 years now. This is something that tells you, absolutely in numerical terms, that aging is the number one problem, not just in South Africa, not just in Nigeria, even in Sierra Leone, every country you look at. So now is the time for Africans, first of all, to recognize that aging is something that should not be viewed as a first world problem, and secondly, to take part. So I am absolutely delighted that there are so many people here today. I'm pretty sure that this is the biggest online event organized by Afrolongevity that I've taken part in, and I've done a few of them. And again, I feel privileged to be able to partner with Osi and Brenda and to help Afrolongevity flourish. All right, so now I'm going to share my screen. What's going on there? Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. Looks good. I am going to move to full screen mode. I would be delighted if somebody would... Oh, I don't think that worked. Hang on. Bang. Share. If somebody would confirm that you can see my screen.
Definitely, I can see your screen.
Perfect, marvelous. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a reasonably educational talk for the next half hour or so. I'm going to start at square one because I know that there may be quite a lot of people here who are unfamiliar with the field in general and certainly unfamiliar with my work. And I'm then going to get into some of the details of what my organization is doing right now and why, because I know that there are plenty of people also in the audience who are relatively knowledgeable about all of this. And then I'm going to leave plenty of time for questions so that people who can who want to ask anything have the opportunity to do so. Right, let's start right here. I always start here. I always start with this question because it's a question that, it doesn't matter whether you're from Africa or from the USA or anywhere. It's a question that everybody needs to ask, and hardly anybody does ask. Today, we know clearly that the reason why life expectancy has been going up everywhere in the world for the past century or two, though of course more recently in some countries than in others, is because of breakthroughs in understanding why people die young. 200 years ago, even in the wealthiest countries in the world, literally more than 1/3 of babies would die before the age of 1. That's the definition of infant mortality. And we fixed that increasingly, starting in the middle of the 19th century, by just figuring out that hygiene is a good idea. And of course, with medicines, but really elementary medicines, like vaccines and antibiotics. And of course, in some places in the world, especially in Africa, there's been a great contribution from mosquito nets and other things like that, things that simply slow down the ability of infectious diseases to spread. Now, there's a really important thing to emphasize about the medicines, about vaccines and antibiotics. The immune system, which is, of course, the aspect of how the body works that is strengthened using these kinds of medicines, the immune system is insanely complicated. And if you ask anyone today who works on the biology of the immune system, an immunologist, and you say, do we understand the immune system? They will certainly say, not at all. There are masses that we do not understand. We're discovering things all the time. But if we look back 200 years ago, 150 years ago, of course, we understood far, far, far less about the immune system than we do today. And you know what? That seems not to have got in the way. The pioneers back then, Louis Pasteur, Edward Jenner, people like that, they saved unimaginable numbers of lives, despite knowing very, very, very nearly nothing about how the immune system worked. We have to remember that when we look at what we are likely to be able to do against aging in general over the coming few years or decades or two. We will not understand the mechanics of aging all that well, even 10 years from now, even 30 years from now. That's my belief. But we don't need to. And I will talk about that for a while. However, I'm going to start by asking this question. What is so different about the health problems of late life that have made them resistant to the kinds of medicines that we have used so successfully against the health problems of early life? Now, most people say it's this. Most people say, well, there's just so many of them. There's so many things that go wrong. Oh, by the way, just to make sure you understand, you're not supposed to be able to read this slide. The idea here is just to give you an impression of how bad aging is in terms of the number of things that go wrong. Most people say, well, okay, there's so many things that go wrong, and they go wrong at more or less the same time, so they exacerbate each other, and so it's just the complexity. And you know what? If that really were the only reason why we have been unsuccessful, then the answer would be, well, let's do a lot of AI. Let's do a lot of artificial intelligence research, because AI is really good at figuring out, complicated things. And I'm not saying that this is not part of the problem, but it's not the main problem. In order to explain what the main problem is for why people still get sick when they get old, I need to ask and answer a different question, which is this. In what ways can or do people become sick? Now, that's a very simple question, and sure enough, most people, again, think they know the answer. If you ask almost anybody that question, then most people will say, well, let's see, there are infections. That's column 1, communicable diseases. Then there's genetic diseases, column 2. These are rare. They are things that a few people inherit from their parents. They matter, but they're rare. And then there's the big one, column 3, the chronic progressive diseases of late life, Alzheimer's disease, almost all cancers, not quite all cancers, of course, but almost all. And heart disease, all the things that I put up in unintelligibly small print a moment ago. And then most people will say, in fact, almost everybody will say, that completely separate from these various types of disease, there is this other thing called aging itself, which consists of these rather poorly defined concepts like frailty, and which, is so different from diseases that intuitively, like subliminally, people will say that it's effectively off limits to medicine, even in principle, not just now, in principle. And, that, of course, is a bit of a problem if it's not true. If it turns out that medicine could affect column 4, but we are telling ourselves that it can't, then we are not going to be trying as hard as we could. All right, so let me now explain what aging is. And it's astonishing, if you think about it, that I would need to do this. Because the fact is, aging has been around a long time. Aging has been the #1 preoccupation of the human race for, the entire history of civilization. And yet, if you ask 10 people for a definition of aging, you'll get a whole bunch of different answers. So I want to give you a simple definition of aging that is, first of all, correct, obviously, but also that demystifies aging, that helps you understand that we already know enough to be able to think about aging and about what to do about it. So here it is. Aging is the combination of two processes. There's a process on the left that goes on throughout life, I mean really throughout life, starting before we're born, and it consists of the creation of damage in the body. Now, what do I mean there? Well, metabolism, that's the word that biologists use to embrace the entire network of processes that keep us alive from one day to the next. Metabolism, generates changes to the structure and composition of the body, not changes that are intentional, changes that are just side effects, byproducts. And those changes accumulate over time. Waste products accumulate. Things, cells die. I'll come back to the specifics of what happens later on. But the critical thing is that these changes are bad for you, and they get progressively more bad for you as time goes on. Now, another important thing is that these changes are not bad for you at once. And the reason that's true is because the body is built to tolerate a certain amount of that change, of that damage, without significantly declining in function, whether physical function or mental function. But that eventually ceases to be true. Eventually we have more damage than what the body is built to tolerate. And that's why we have this other process, the one on the right, where the damage causes pathology. I'm using the word pathology just to encompass everything that goes wrong with our physical or mental function late in life. That process really only begins in middle age, because until that time the body has only a tolerable amount of damage. All right, so what's our goal here? What we'd like is not to get sick when we get old. So that means we want to separate metabolism from pathology. We want to allow people to continue being alive, in other words, performing metabolism, without exhibiting pathologies. All right. Now, that helps a lot in terms of the question I asked a couple of slides ago, the ways to be sick. Here is a corrected version of the table I gave you earlier. And if you look closely, you will see that all 4 of the columns are the same as they were before. You've got communicable disease, you've got genetic ones, you've got chronic ones. But I've moved that big, thick black line. It used to be between column 3 and column 4, and now it's between 2 and 3. Why is that so important? Well, two things. First of all, it answers the question that I asked right at the beginning of the talk. Whoever's talking, please mute themselves. Thank you. It answers the first question. It explains why the health conditions of late life have not yielded to the same kinds of medicine that we have been so successful with in terms of the health problems of early life. Early life problems are basically column 1, late life problems are column 3. And they're completely different things. Column 1 comes from external sources, from agents like, viruses or bacteria or whatever. Column 3 is self-inflicted. It happens as a side effect of being alive in the first place. So we should not expect to have the same effect from the same kind of medicine. That's one thing that moving the black line says. The second thing, though, is perhaps even more important, which is that because there's no black line now between column 3 and column 4, that emphasizes that there's really no meaningful difference between those two things. And there really isn't. That is not an exaggeration. The difference between column 3 and column 4 is entirely semantic. Column 3 consists of the aspects of aging that we have chosen to give disease-like names to, and the ones in column 4 are the ones we have not. That is all. And that's really important in terms of dealing with aging. So let's come back to my definition of aging, and let me remind you that the goal here is to separate metabolism from pathology. Now, historically, as soon as we started even caring about the health problems of late life, we treated them as if everything I've told you on the previous slide was not true, as if we could, in fact, treat the things in column 3, the health problems of late life, as if they were infections. And lo and behold, it has not worked. We can explain why it hasn't worked very simply by using my definition of aging. Essentially, that approach consists of trying to separate metabolism from pathology by separating damage from pathology. In other words, we just ignore the left-hand process, we just let damage accumulate, and we try to fix up its consequences. And, well, how surprising is it that that has not worked? It's bleeding obvious that it wouldn't work, because as the damage accumulates, it's completely obvious that anything that tries to directly address the consequences of that damage is going to become progressively less effective as time goes on. So there you go. It's not just that the pathologies of aging are very many and varied, that slide in very small font that I put up a few slides ago. It's that it's an inherent consequence of being alive. It's going to get worse over time unless you deal with things more preventatively. All right, so that's what people started thinking. More than a century ago, a few people started to realize that, yeah, we have to be more preventative. And they said, well, okay, instead of trying to separate metabolism from pathology by separating damage from pathology, instead, let's do it by separating metabolism from damage. Let's make the body run more cleanly, slow down the rate at which metabolism generates damage. And that will be great because it will postpone the age at which the damage gets to the point that kicks off the right-hand process. Unfortunately, that approach has also been completely unsuccessful. This is why. Metabolism is very, very, very complicated. And again, it's not so much the complexity that's the problem. If that were the problem, then, in principle anyway, we might be able to use artificial intelligence to help. Unfortunately, it's not the complexity. The problem is that the creation of damage is intrinsically intertwined with what metabolism needs to do to keep us alive. It's simply not possible to have metabolism do the things we need it to do without having it also create damage at pretty much the natural rate. But that's where I come in, because I, thought about this for a while, 25 years ago or more, And then one day I had a eureka moment and I realized that, hey, hang on, we are overlooking a third approach, a third way to separate metabolism from pathology, which is preventative maintenance. We can go in and repair the damage every so often. And we don't even need to repair it thoroughly. Even if we just repair most of it every so often, we will get what we need. We can allow metabolism to generate damage at the normal rate, which means that we sidestep this issue of metabolism being really hard to understand and having intrinsic damage creation happening. And yet, damage will not reach that threshold level that causes the right-hand process to happen, that makes us sick. That's all we need to do. So, this is kind of astonishing that people haven't thought of that. It may sound arrogant that I call it the common sense alternative, but hey, hang on. The reason it's common sense is because we already do it successfully with, simple man-made machines like this one. This is a car that's obviously more than 100 years old. And it's working. Someone's gone off mute again. It's more than 100 years old, and it's still working every bit as well as the day it was built. And the reason it is very straightforward. It's had really good comprehensive preventative maintenance throughout its existence. And, it works. This car was not built to last more than 10 or 15 years, and yet here it is. Now, of course, the maintenance approach is inherently a divide and conquer approach. It's a divide and conquer approach even with a car. Here what we do is we have to describe what the damage is, what changes are being inflicted on the body by metabolism, what changes to the body's structure and composition at the molecular and cellular level. But the good news is that even though the body is a ridiculously complicated machine, nevertheless, we can actually describe what the damage is in pretty good detail. What I came up with way back is this classification that you'll see on the left-hand side of this table. There's lots and lots and lots of different types of damage, so this is a classification. Within each category there are a bunch of examples, but the classification is still really useful because of the right-hand side of the table. The fact that we can describe for each category a generic approach to addressing it, to doing maintenance, to removing the damage. And so this is a classification that I put out way back. I'm pleased to say that there's been great progress in all of these areas. They're all being pursued in the private sector now, as well as in academia. So that's pretty good news. And it took a while for me to persuade my colleagues in the expert community that this made sense, but I did so eventually. And so a decade or so later, this paper came out. It's called The Hallmarks of Aging, and it is essentially a restatement of what I had said a decade earlier. But the key thing is that its time had come. I had done the hard work of, getting the communities to think this way at all. And so when this paper came out, it became the absolute Bible of the field. It has been cited far more often than any other paper in the whole of the biology of aging this century. And, that's a really good thing. So I'm going to only spend another 5 minutes or so speaking, and then we can move on to questions. But I want to talk about what we're doing about this. Now, I have run 3 nonprofits over the past 20 years or so. And in the first 2 of them, the Methuselah Foundation and Sense Research Foundation, my main focus was on developing these various components. Let me go back to it. Here we are, these components here. And the good news was that, various alternative ways to do the things on the right-hand side came along. So that's great. And again, some of them we pursued because other people thought they were too difficult and they didn't do them. But this is a divide and conquer approach. And that means that it has inherently 2 phases to it. That means you have to develop these components, but then you have to put them together. And that's an important thing to think about, because in most engineering, you don't really think about that part. You say, well, okay, once you develop the bits of a divide and conquer design for addressing a technical problem, then then assembling the bits, you can be pretty sure that the whole thing's going to work. In medicine, it's not like that. This again comes back to the fact that we are seeking to manipulate a system that, that we have a very poor understanding of. So you can expect surprises in phase 2 when you put the bits together. And so I've been desperate to get to that stage as soon as possible. And I'm delighted to say that over the past few years that has become possible. We started out about 3 or 4 years ago. We developed a design of a study that we were able to perform involving 4 different ways that had individually been shown to work in mice. And we took a bunch of mice. First of all, we only started treating them when they were already in middle age. So that means about 18 months of age, because these mice normally live about 2.5 years. And then we gave them 4 different things. And we wanted to see how well they would add up. Each of these things had been shown by other people in other research groups to have some effect on mouse lifespan. We wanted to see whether we could get an additive effect. And the short answer is we did. This is what we got. The big, thick red line is the mice that got all 4 of our treatments. And let me explain what these curves show. They are called Kaplan-Meier curves. So what they show is simply the age at death of each mouse. So we started out with 50 mice, and in that treatment group, you can see that the x-axis begins at 580. That's about 19 months of age. That's when we started the experiment. And as time goes on, mice die. So the y-axis is the proportion of mice that are still alive at any given age. And eventually, after 1166 or something like that, all the mice were dead. So that's the red line. The thick blue line is the treatment group, the mice that were not getting any treatments at all. And as you can see, they lived considerably less long. So that's great. But the important thing that I want to draw your attention to is all of the other lines. All of the other lines are treatment groups that were getting some, but not all, of the therapies. And those mice were somewhere in the middle, which means we got what we were looking for. We got an additive effect. The mice that were getting everything did better. So that's what we wanted. The male mice, it was more complicated, but the same basic story. We also, of course, measured a lot of different aspects of the health of these mice. Now, this is because, everyone cares a lot about making sure that the way in which we extend lifespan is by extending health span. And I could say that, there's too much emphasis on that. But that's not because it's not true. It's because it's unavoidable. I don't work on longevity. I work on health. Longevity is a side effect of health. It is never going to be possible to extend mouse lifespan or human lifespan by very much without extending health span. That's the way we will do it. So we measured a lot of things, but really that's just because it's the done thing. It's what you're supposed to do. So now the question is, what do we do next? And I'm going to just, and this is going to be the last thing I want to talk about, because, we were very happy that we got this proof of additivity, but we have to acknowledge that the magnitude of the effect that we got was not as big as we would like. If you take mice that are 18 months old, then we have known for 50 years how to make them live about 4 months longer than they normally would. Basically, you just do this thing called calorie restriction, which is feeding them less than they would like, and they live longer. So we'd like to, we're only going to be happy with what we're achieving if we can significantly exceed that 4-month extension. And we didn't do so in the first study. So we believe that the right thing to do to actually get there is to put more things together. And that's why next time we do this study, which we hope to be very soon, we will actually do 8 different interventions rather than 4. We have a list here of the ones we're likely to do. The ones on the 5 on the left, the first 2 on the right, and also probably oxytocin, but we have choices, as you can see. So, we believe that we have a good chance of getting a lot further with this. That's what we're going to do next. I won't talk about that right now. I will talk about this. If you're interested in not only listening to the talks that I give, but also in doing some learning online, then you could do worse than going to Aubrey, Aubrai, which is a chatbot. It's an AI agent with fantastic graphics, as you can see, that has been trained on my work, on my talks and publications and so on. And it can give you really rather good answers to pretty much any question that you would like to ask about this whole field. I'll stop there and just say thank you so much to all the people who have given the money that let me do all of this. Anyone who's in the audience who wants to help, the QR code on the right. And there's a review paper that we put out not long ago, which talks in more depth about all of this. But for the moment, I will just put up my email address, website, and I will stop sharing my screen because then we can do questions. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you so much, Aubrey. As usual, this is massive. So I think this person have muted this person before. So what we have to do is to remove the person. I don't know. Okay, so excuse me. Okay. So it's time for question. If you have any question that you would like to ask, this is the time to ask your question.
And let me say, any question is fine. So I spent most of my time on the science today. If you want to talk about the impact on Africa, the benefits for getting involved in this, how society is going to respond, I can answer all of those questions too.
Okay, so you just have to raise your hand, then yeah. Let's see. If you have any question, you just have to raise your hand, then okay. So from where I'm sitting, Dr. De Grey, there is always a problem. There's always a problem in Africa. Of course, when people see the teachings on aging as playing God or trying to claim that you are a demigod, but the scripture is saying, or what the Quran is saying, you're trying to prove it wrong, and that it is a natural thing to age. Mm-hmm. How do you respond to issues like that or conversations like that?
Yeah, so the way I respond sometimes depends on what mood I am in. When I'm feeling charitable, I say, well, okay, is malaria natural? Of course it is. Malaria is every bit as natural as aging. And yet, people in Africa and people around the world are not in favor of it. People are trying to fix it and stop people from getting sick as a result of malaria and dying as a result of malaria. And we think that's a good thing. More generally, we can say this. We were built, whether it's by God or by anybody else, we were built to manipulate nature to our benefit. We were given the ability and the desire to figure out how to make our lives better and how to make each other's lives better. And so it would be unnatural to walk away from that, to say, oh, we should leave this alone because it's how it is. what's natural is to do our best to improve our lives and each other's lives. And furthermore, Holy Scripture says exactly the same thing. Whether it's the Bible, whether it's the Quran, whatever it is, it's all about having a duty, an obligation to minimize suffering. There's no question aging causes a hell of a lot of suffering. It causes more suffering than anything else that we experience in the modern world. So let's be clear, it would be a sin not to work on
this. I think there is one of your famous quotes that has been around for over 5 to 6 years by Eternal Life Fan. It reached us, if changing our world is playing God, it is just one more way in which God made us in his image. And I think it's also aligned with what you're saying here now.
Totally. That's another way of saying the same thing.
Yes. So, Chair Mary Repentance, you can ask your question.
You're muted. There we go.
Thank you so much, sir, for the opportunity. Quick one. My question is, you talked about revolution biotechnology. So my question is this: will it be a particular drug, or will it be a combination of different therapies?
It's definitely going to be a combination. I mean,
right.
All you have to really remember in order to understand that is that the body is a machine. It's a really, really, really complicated machine. And any machine with moving parts, even a simple one like a car, does itself damage, lots of different types of damage, as a consequence, as a side effect of its normal operation. This is just a factor of physics, never mind biology, right? So the human body is just the same. Lots of different things go wrong, and the body is very good at repairing damage as it happens, but it's not perfect. So our goal, our job as medical researchers and as medical practitioners is to augment what the body already has, to fill in the gaps in the inbuilt automatic anti-aging machinery that the body is, that we were born with. And that's really what makes this whole thing practical. If it were not for that inbuilt damage repair that the body already has, then the complexity of the body would be so enormous. No, it would be overwhelming. We wouldn't really have much of a chance. But also, we wouldn't be here in the first place, right? So yes, so that's what makes it practical. It's damage repair. But there's a lot of gaps that we have to plug, so we have to keep going and develop a lot of different things and give them all to the same people at the same time. Now, I should say one little additional thing on that, because you may think, well, that sounds terribly complicated, it sounds impractical to deliver these treatments, even if we were to develop them. But that's not really true. Many of you will have heard of a vaccine called the MMR vaccine, which is given, certainly in the West, to pretty much every baby, and it's increasingly prevalent in every country in the world. The MMR vaccine is not a vaccine. It is 3 vaccines together. One for mumps, one for measles, and one for rubella. That's why it's called MMR. But it's all delivered in the same syringe at the same time, so it feels like one vaccine from the point of view of the recipient. Most of the things that we're going to need to do to bring aging under control are going to be delivered in that same way, by injections. So I can totally see that we will be injecting 300 things in the same syringe at the same time, but that's fine. It won't make the complexity impractical.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Pleasure.
Great. Dear Chisom, you can ask your question after that, Neti.
Thank you so much. It's always a delight listening to Dr. Aubrey. One thing crossed my mind while he was speaking. I was thinking about how practical this can be. We're talking about metabolism maintenance. If it will be practical enough for everyone, wouldn't a select group of people hijack it? Let's say if we have something like that already working, will it be wouldn't it be too expensive? And then only a select few will hijack it, to make themselves more healthy, live longer, and then another group of people will not be able to access that kind of treatment. So
Yeah,
I'm just thinking about the practicality of that, if at all we have something like that working.
Okay, so this is a very common concern, but it's absolutely not going to happen that way. I am completely certain that these treatments will be available to almost everybody almost as soon as they are available to anybody, even though initially they will be fairly expensive to deliver. Why do I say that? It's not because I have faith in humanity's, respect for humanitarian goals. Not at all. I'm not that naive. It's not even an electoral thing. In most countries in the world, we hope that when the public wants something, they vote for it and they get it. But even that, we know, is not always true. No, it's neither of those things. The reason I'm sure that these therapies will be available to everybody is simply because of the economic imperative. The fact that the current situation we see today is that aging is insanely expensive. And as I mentioned earlier, this is even true in Africa, because even in Africa, even in the poorest countries in the world, the level of control that we now have over infectious diseases is pretty good, and it's getting better all the time. So that by the time these treatments come along, maybe let's say 20 years from now, 15 years from now, even in sub-Saharan Africa, every country will have a life expectancy at least 65, or 60 anyway. So it's just economically vital to make sure that people don't get sick, because once they do, they are very, very, very expensive. In the West, the situation is ridiculously so, that 80 or 85% of the medical budget of the United States, for example, goes on the health problems of late life. So even at the beginning, when these treatments are quite expensive to deliver, they will still pay for themselves at the level of the national economy. They will still pay for themselves at the level of the national economy many times over, really quickly. And by the time they arrive, governments will already understand that logic, which means they will know that if they don't make these things available, if they don't front load the necessary investment to make all of this available to everybody who's old enough to need it, then they will just go bankrupt, because other countries will do that, and those countries will prosper, and the countries that don't do it will be economically disadvantaged, enormously so. So yes, it's a very valid concern, but it has a very ironclad answer. It's just pure, sheer, mercenary economics.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. de Grey. Nettie, you can ask your question before we start taking the question in chat box.
Thank you, Osi Nakachi, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Aubrey, for the insightful session. I just want to start by saying that the first time I was hearing about longevity was in 2022, when we were launching Afrolongevity in South Africa, and since then, I just realized that okay, this topic it's too big for me to roll out, but then I decided to focus on awarenesses and on just a basic step of awarenesses and advocacy around that. But I have a question. It's a bit different from what you've just presented, but I wanted to ask a previous speaker because I need more information in terms of how when I'm doing the awarenesses and advocacy at my level. The question is, which ethical frameworks or guidelines are currently used like to govern the longevity medicine, particularly around the data privacy, AI use, and the equitable access for that. And then I'm asking this because I'm particularly interested in how longevity science can be integrated within the community-based level, especially in education and innovation, digital innovation, to empower people, maybe to empower people to take control of their health in earlier life. So
Yeah, okay.
hence I'm asking that questions. Thank you so much. I'll wait.
Thank you. Well, there are various facets to your question. There's what we should be doing today in terms of ethical guidelines, privacy and so on. And there's what we should be doing in the future when progress is made and we have medicines more available. Today, sure, yeah, there's nothing really special about today's longevity medicine. The same ethical guidelines, excuse me, the same ethical guidelines apply to longevity clinics and so on today that they would apply in any other walk of medicine. There's nothing new there. But in the future, we're going to be in a very different situation, and we may be there quite soon, like 5 years from now. We're going to be in a situation where we don't yet have these medicines, but we really, really want them. In other words, society will wake up and there will be a widespread, in fact, an almost universal understanding that aging really is the biggest problem. The way I like to say it is that aging will become the new COVID. So you know what happened with COVID 6 years ago? Society just said, we don't fancy this. We don't like this idea that this disease is going to kill us all. Let's fix it. And society did what was necessary. There were a lot of ethical guidelines and procedural and safety guidelines that were essentially swept away over the course of 2020. And that happened because the public wanted it to happen. It happened because governments knew that their electorate wanted this disease to be fixed as soon as possible, and that the regulations and the bureaucratic inertia that they themselves had put in place simply did not apply anymore, not for this particular case. So the difficulty we have, of course, is that COVID was a new problem, and it was always recognized as a disease, whereas aging is a very, very old problem that society has somehow tricked itself into thinking differently about. That's what we need to change. So, if we answer your question in terms of how things are going to be then, 5 years from now, maybe longer, when people are rushing to develop these treatments as quickly as possible to save as many lives as possible, then, honestly, I would not want to hazard a guess as to what ethical boundaries are going to apply and what are not, especially in terms of things like privacy. We are going to be in a situation where treatments are very experimental, and it's going to be vital to share information very widely so that doctors, and indeed AIs, can analyze large amounts of data from large numbers of people with different genetics, different metabolism, so as to get the best information about what's going to work as quickly as possible. Honestly, it's going to be a very turbulent time, but that's a good thing, because it will get results quicker than if it's not turbulent. Right now, nothing special is happening, but then it's going to be chaos, and that's a good thing.
Okay, thank you so much. We have a question here. If longevity is understood as an outcome of sustained health, with greater emphasis on health span rather than lifespan, how can we design practical systems or institutions that help individuals maintain optimal health consistently over time, rather than only responding to illness. In particular, what role can integrated models that combine clinical care, nutrition, and physical fitness play in making health span a lived reality rather than an ideal concept?
Yeah, so I mean, the key thing I want to start with in answering that question is to emphasize that longevity is a side effect of health today, and it will still be a side effect of health when we have medicines that can greatly extend both health and life. So that does not change with this transition. In other words, we should already have, and we kind of do already have, systems and institutions that help individuals do what you're saying. It's just that at the moment, there isn't enough public enthusiasm for it. When I say that longevity is a side effect of health, I'm kind of saying that quality of life confers quantity of life. But today, people don't think that way. People think that there is some kind of trade-off between quality and quantity. And in a way, there actually is a trade-off today, because the fact is, there's a lot of things that people enjoy doing that are bad for you. People enjoy smoking. People enjoy going to McDonald's and nowhere else. I'm afraid, that's just a fact of life. And therefore, people make perfectly legitimate choices about that trade-off. My first wife was a biologist, a very smart one, very knowledgeable, but she smoked a lot throughout her whole life, and eventually it did kill her. She died of lung cancer at the age of 79. She knew what she was doing. So we absolutely need to educate people about that transition, about the fact that, yes, longevity is a side effect of health today, and it will be a side effect of health in the future. It always has been. But the trade-off with quality of life, with things we enjoy doing, will be very different.
Okay, thank you so much. I don't think we still have questions. Do we still have any other questions? Yeah, I don't think we still have questions. Anyways, thank you so much, Dr. de Grey. For those who are here, we still have 3 events this year. Our major event be coming up in August. We are partnering with Tess Fahum at Masu, and Tess was a student of Aubrey de Grey. So, and the event is taking place in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, in August. So we have local events in Nigeria, in Imo State University. We're partnering with Imo State University, and we really need your support here. Ensure that you communicate with your peers, your friends, wherever that you're joining us from. And we also have the one in South Africa, a local event, and it was Neti. Neti is the one coordinating. She's the one in charge there. We are going to Limpopo. Neti, are you there? So we're going to Limpopo for the event. So, but our major event, our major summit will be taking place in Addis, and it's absolutely free for delegates. So all you have to do is to indicate interest. Tess got us hooked with an institution, a new institution in their country, and they want us to do this. So all you have to do is that you indicate interest, then you hop the train and the plane, then we'll see you in Addis. So thank you so much, Dr. de Grey, and we hope to, this is the second cohort. We are partnering with Geneva College of Longevity Science. We did the first cohort. This is the second cohort for the program, and this will be ending second week of next month. Thank you so much for making out time to be here amidst your tight and busy schedule. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me, Essie. And honestly, you know, I want to congratulate you and Brenda again and everyone who works with you for making Afrolongevity such a success and for growing it so well. You're doing fantastically important work, and anything I can do to support you, I will be very happy to do. Bye for now.
Thank you. Thank you.